Hi, I'm Jonathan, and this is Smash Trail. In this video, we'll be talking about classical China, classical Persia, and classical Greece. Classical China was a period after the Zhou dynasty, including the Warring States and the end of the Han dynasty. Classical China was also a time period in which Confucianism took place around the 6th to 5th century BC in response to political unrest and dysfunctionality in states' government. Confucianism depicted 5 relationships in which how to interact, and this was created in an attempt to fill Chinese government spots with educated, moral, and ethical people to bring unity and principle to the nation. Taoism was also established in order to create a more fundamental understanding of the world, nature, and humanity. Legalism, however, was the ideal that brought China into order and ended the Warring States imperialism. Legalism was ruthlessly efficient and strict, and focused purely on strengthening the states. This wasn't very popular or supported publicly, but brought an end to the Warring States period. The first emperor of China, the first new emperor of China, that is, was Qin Shuangdi, who founded the Qin dynasty. And though his empire did not last very long, he brought in a new form of government which was centralized, and within 20 years, however, his dynasty had fallen to a brutal and bloody and chaotic fall. This was due to strict new regulations across all of China, as well as the burning of Confucian books and supposed burning of Confucian people. Qin Shuangdi was remembered as a tyrant, and his tomb depicts such as several concubines and several more workers were sacrificed along with him in the building and finishing of the tomb. The Han dynasty then was established by Commander Liu Bang, who persisted and restored order and founded the new dynasty. The Han dynasty was one of the most influential and long-lasting empires, being in power from 206 BCE to 220 CE. Liu Bang saw advantages and disadvantages in both forms of government and tried to utilize the best of both to create one super government. The reason for the slight decentralization was to ensure support from those who were given large plots of land, mainly family members, and to ensure support as well as government districts run by officials loyal to the emperor. However, the government was switched to a very focused central government after a spectacle in 200 BCE involving a nomadic tribe, Xiongnu, that almost kidnapped Liu Bang after besieging him and receiving absolutely no help from his family. After that, he retook all the land given to his family members and re-added them back to the empire. His successor was Han Wudi, the martial emperor. He was on the throne for 54 years and ruled with tenacity and zeal. He established a massive bureaucracy and implemented officials to maintain order. This needed a massive amount of qualified recruitment, however, but there was no efficient way of mass recruiting of those who were qualified. Under his rule, being a legalist, he created a university of Confucianism, which prepared men for government under a strict, principle-based, intellectual learning system. Now, why is this a big deal, you may ask? Because he was a legalist, but he gave way for Confucianism to live throughout centuries in China. During this dynastic period, patriarchal aspects were implemented, as well as the invention of paper. Silk was also introduced during this Han dynasty. The Han dynasty fell when the later Han dynasty, which was a second part of the Han dynasty, became unable to hold back uprisings and revolts in its late years. Poor leadership and inability to quell unrest paralyzed the government and ultimately caused its collapse. Now we move on to Persia. The Persian name was still connected with the Medes, who ruled the northern Iranian territory, and they lived by their name for a while. But the Neo-Assyrian Empire would come to conquer the Medes, which would lead to the downfall of that civilization. Cyrus the Great decided to branch off from the Medes and make Persia an independent civilization itself. Cyrus would establish the Achaemenid Empire of Persia, which would become one of the largest and most powerful empires of its time. The Achaemenid Empire would extend from Anatolia and Egypt across Western Asia to northern India and even Central Asia. This empire was pretty big. Cyrus would start off by conquering the empire that was in control of the Persian people for hundreds of years, the Medians, and he would follow by conquering Lydia and Babylon afterwards. Cyrus died, and his son Cambyses II conquered as well, who would work conquering Egypt for most of his kingship. Then came a bigger leader, more like Cyrus, that was named Darius the Great. Darius discovered and made use of a road similar to the Silk Road called the Royal Road, which is very useful, that stretches from Susa, Darius' first capital, to Sardis, with posting stations at different intervals. The Persian language during this time period was also a very special version of cuneiform. To finish up the classical Persian Empire, This empire went to become one of the largest and most successful empires, conquering most of the area around them under the rule of Darius and Cyrus. After the death of these great rulers, classical Persia would fall due to weak rulers that were in power, and taxes would increase as other empires would invade because of the economy crashing, leading to the overall fall of classical Persia. Let's get to know a little bit about classical Greece. After the Minoans and the Mycenaeans went away, there wasn't a centralized empire, so city-states popped up all over Greece and became a very popular form of government. These city-states were referred to as polis or polis. Due to the popularity of these regions and areas, they became very heavily populated and developed into principal areas of Greek culture and society. These are ones that you may know, like Sparta and Athens. Speaking of Sparta, though, let's talk about the mighty Spartan society. Sparta was a military-based polis where distinction of citizens was not based on wealth or social status, but of military talent and discipline. Spartan boys left their home at the age of 7 and lived in barracks in the military, and trained until they were 20 to serve in the military until retirement. Women also had to train, but it was to make them bear strong children. When a girl reached 19, she would be married and have a child, but she would not live with her husband. Athens, on the other hand, was very different. Athens was a city-state that implemented democracy if you were a free man. And with its first implements of democracy being based on culture, fine arts, and philosophy, it was very different from Sparta, as there was no complete focus on military and nearly not as large of a slave class as there was in Sparta. The differences between these two city-states depicts the independence they each had over each other.